Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. My name's Mike Tansey from Silver Sands, and welcome to our webinar on making the most of Microsoft Teams. For the next hour, James will be running you through the latest changes in Microsoft Teams and sharing his top tips and tricks with you, as well as answering any questions that you may have around Microsoft Teams. With Microsoft Teams being so integral to our working lives, we do hope that everyone will get something from this session that you didn't know before, and you can share that with your friends or colleagues. And today it'll be run as more of an interactive session, so mostly demos with James. So with that in mind, I'd like to pass over to James for you to introduce yourself and kick off the webinar. James, over to you, please.
Thanks, Mike, and welcome everyone. Great to be doing a webinar on Friday afternoon, and particularly to be doing a webinar on some of the new capabilities in Teams. So just to echo what Mike said, what I've done is picked what I think are some of the most useful features that have appeared in Microsoft Teams over recent months. I'm hoping that certainly some of these features you're already aware of and maybe you're already making use of. Some of the features I might show may not have yet found their ways into your environments. And I will touch upon potentially some features that are going to be coming quite soon. As Mike said, if you've got any questions at all as I go through, feel free to add into the chat. I have left some time at the end of the session to answer any other questions, but yeah, please feel free, add any questions. More than happy to be interrupted and go off piste to talk about anything as long as it's relatively Teams related. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to just share my desktop. And one of the challenges of doing demonstrations on Microsoft Teams when you're using Microsoft Teams to demonstrate Microsoft Teams is I'm in a live meeting. So bear with me, some of the things I'll be showing are actually in this meeting itself. So let me just do this to start with. Okay. So I'm going to start with something that I've certainly made use of since it's arrived, and I've seen many people that I believe do need to make use of it. And this is simply the fact that when I'm in a meeting and I'm looking at my video feed, it's not always apparent that your video feed that you see of yourself is a mirror image. Okay, so I'm seeing a mirror image of myself. I hold up my left hand, I see my left hand held on the left. But actually what you guys are seeing is the third person view of me, which isn't the mirror image. So if I hold my left hand, you actually see me holding up the hand on the right, okay? And that explains why in the top here, the logo is backwards, because actually in a mirror, if I was holding this up to a mirror, that's what I would see. So often confuses people, and there's a great little feature if you go into device settings over here called Mirror My Video. And if I do that, this will now show me the third person view of myself with the text in the correct way. So I can check that what you're seeing is correct. It is kind of confusing now, because if I hold up my left hand, it appears to me on my right, and I find that difficult to kind of comprehend. So it's not a mode that I would use all the time, but it's very useful to check your background. It's also useful in scenarios where you're writing things that you need to see them the right way around. Another thing about the video is if you're in Teams meetings all day, one of the things that can be a bit distracting is seeing yourself. Okay, and so there is a new feature. If I just unpin myself there, for my own video, I can now say hide for me, and that will hide my feed only for myself. You should still be able to see me, but it means that I'm not seeing myself, which can be a little bit distracting if you see yourself throughout the day. Now, one other thing that has been around for a while, but I definitely recommend using this, is in the view options up here, you have the setting gallery at top. And what this essentially does is take all of the people who are attending the meeting and put them at the top of the screen. Now, I find this is very useful because when people have their video feeds on, eye contact's kind of important. And whilst it's kind of difficult to look at your camera, on my device, my camera's at the top of the screen, I'm more likely to be looking towards the top of the screen and therefore looking at the person speaking to me if I put the gallery at the top rather than if I've got the gallery at the side or at the bottom. So just a setting there that's kind of useful to make use of. So we talked about a couple of video settings. Let's move on to a few sound settings. So I'm sure all of you have experienced the joy of being in a meeting where there's some background noise going on, and I'm guilty. Hold my hand up. I've got a dog that's very vocal, particularly when the postman comes at 11 o'clock, and so I often use this mode, noise suppression. Now, to be honest, if I've got a headset on, it's less important because my microphone's pretty good at taking out the background noise. But if I didn't have the headset on, then it's worth exploring these things. And I've done a few tests and a few recordings, and it does make a big difference. It's not my dog bark proof, but it is pretty good. So if you set it to high, and you've got stuff going on behind you, if you're in a noisy office or there's roadworks going on where you are, it does do a pretty good job of taking out or reducing the impact of that background noise. I find the default doesn't always pick up very well what's happening. So if you are aware that you're making a lot of noise, then have a go and turn that on. The other thing is, if you're attending a meeting and you're maybe not actively talking, or you're in a situation where there's a lot of background noise going on. So obviously you can mute your mic and you can use the keyboard shortcut to mute your mic. But I find it can be a little bit fiddly to quickly respond to a question. So what they've now introduced is the ability to have a single button press. Sorry, it's two buttons, but it's a single press that allows you to unmute your mic while you have the button pressed, and immediately you let go of the buttons, it will mute it back. So I'll just show you an example of this. I'm going to mute my mic, and I'm going to press Control and the space bar. And whilst I've got Control and the space bar pressed, I'm unmuted. As soon as I release it, so I use that feature quite a lot in meetings where there's background noise, and I only want my mic to be unmuted when I want to say something. Just a word of warning, your Teams meeting app needs to be your focal point. If you're off on the internet looking at the Winter Olympics or something like that, then that's not going to work. Okay, so one other thing. If you are looking to stream music or content of a higher quality, then there is an option available here called high fidelity audio mode. Now, essentially what this does is increases the bandwidth used to stream the content that you're streaming. So if you want to wow your colleagues with your excellent guitar playing, or you've got the latest soundtrack from Spotify you want them to enjoy in the best possible quality, then you need to turn this on, and you need to make sure you've got noise suppression turned off, and you'll get a much higher bit rate of streaming. Just remember though, it's going to use a lot more bandwidth to do it. Okay, so those are some of the things that relate to sound. A couple of other things. I'm just going to mention live captions. So I get quite a lot of questions about this. What's the difference between live captions and transcription? And effectively, they kind of satisfy a similar purpose, that they automatically generate live captions, a transcription of what's being said in a meeting. But there is a subtle difference. With a transcription, of which we have one running here, the transcription is recorded and a record of the transcription is available after the meeting. And also, there's only certain roles of people that can enable and start the transcription. With live captions can essentially be started by any attendee. And the purpose of live captions is to provide a live caption whilst the meeting is active. So it may be because you're in an environment where you can't hear, you haven't got your headset, or you have hearing difficulties, or maybe it's easier for you to see what people are saying because they have poor connectivity if you have the live captions enabled. Live captions don't get saved, okay? So they don't get saved, it's the transcription that gets saved. And just one thing about live captions, there is an option here to change the spoken language. And this does not magically change what I'm speaking into Chinese or Finnish or Italian. That is so it knows the language of the person who's speaking, and it does a better job of translating what they're saying. So if your speaker's speaking French, set it to French. If they're speaking English, set it to English. Okay, so that's some kind of just basic things that if you're attending meetings, just some little things to use. If you're presenting at meetings or organizing meetings, there's a couple of other features that I just want to introduce you to. So Microsoft have now extended the range of capabilities you can apply to attendees. So in this case, if I just take Francis, I can essentially, even though I've disabled everyone's mics and cameras, if Francis has a question, I can enable Francis's mic, I can enable Francis's camera, and likewise, I can actually disable the camera and disable the mic. So I have complete control over when someone's camera is enabled or when it's not enabled. And likewise, I can make them into a presenter. One of the other features I really like is the hands up feature. But when you've got a meeting where lots of people put their hands up, it can be a bit tricky and I feel it's a bit impolite sometimes not to know who's put their hands up. So a new feature is when you put your hand up, it will now tell me who put their hand up first and in what order. So just as a little test, could a few of you just raise your hands and we'll see what we should see in the list of attendees. Well done, Matt. Top marks for you. So you can see down here, you're a bit slow there, Mike. Third's not really good enough.
I thought I was on it.
So I can now see and I can kind of politely ask people. I can, I think that's a great feature. And I find that really helpful in sessions where maybe I've missed someone putting their hand up, etc. So thank you for that. You can put your hands down now. Another thing that I can do as a presenter is I can do an instant poll. Now, an instant poll, these have been around for a while, but there's a slightly new one that's been introduced. So I'm going to click polls and I'm going to create a poll on the fly. Now, I could have done this in advance and you can see here, there's some suggestions. I could have created a poll in advance, but I'm just going to do one on the fly. So it's going to say what type of poll you want. Now, for this one, I'm going to do a word cloud, but we could do a multiple choice or we could do a quiz where you actually get scored or have to answer a question correctly. But I'm going to do a word cloud poll and I'm going to say describe today's weather in a single word. Okay, and I can say share the poll with everyone, make it anonymous. Now that'll create the poll, and when I'm ready to activate the poll, I can launch it. Now I'd appreciate if a couple of you could respond to the poll, but this is a family rated webinar, so please use discretion in how you answer the question. So today. Excellent. It's always interesting asking, doing an audience like this of how many ways we can describe the same, the hot. That's obviously someone maybe not in the UK there. Okay, thank you for that. So you get the idea. I can run the poll. I like the word cloud one. I think it gives instant kind of visual feedback of a question. And what I can then do is I can close the poll. So I can say, thank you very much. We've now closed the poll. That poll will be available to me. I can export it, but as you'll see in a minute, that information is not lost when the meeting ends. That information will be available to me after the meeting. Okay, so let me just unpin me from there. So let me just change gears slightly and talk about after the meeting. So obviously I can't
James,
stop.
we can still see your form poking up.
I beg your pardon.
It's all right. It's lovely and sunny though.
Right, okay, one sec. That should have gone.
Oh, maybe I've got to close at my end actually, I think.
Yeah.
That'll be it. It's all gone.
Okay, so I'm going to switch into a different tenancy here to show you the information that's available to you outside of a meeting that was conducted. So imagine this is the meeting that's taking place now, but the meeting's now finished. So I've got my meeting recording, which we'll go into in a second. I've got my transcript here. So this is when transcription is enabled. That's a copy of the transcript. And I've got my attendance record. So if we go into the meeting recording, which I have it open here, as I'm sure you're all aware, meeting recordings now all get stored in either OneDrive or SharePoint. And over the recent months, Microsoft have introduced many of the capabilities there that used to be available within Stream. So in addition to obviously just being able to play my recording, I have now got controls that allow me to skip forward and skip back. And for me, one I use a lot is I can accelerate the rate that the recording's running at. So if I want to kind of quickly get through it and get to the point I'm interested in, then I might run it at 1.5 times speed. If the meeting was recorded with transcriptions, I then have the option for closed captions, which is what we've got here. If you didn't record the meeting with transcriptions, as of today, there's not a lot you can do. As of tomorrow, there is a capability coming out that will allow you to generate a transcription file on the fly for a recording that did not originally have one. And the other thing that's coming is the ability to be able to upload, well, effectively edit the transcription file that's there by downloading it and then re-uploading it. So if there's a really important video that contains key messages that it's very important the transcription's 100% accurate, then the ability to be able to download and edit the transcription and re-upload it is kind of important. The other thing that I just wanted to show here is if I go into information about the video, all of the videos that you have stored in OneDrive now are likely to have this column on them, expiration date. So this has been a bit of an interesting journey for Microsoft because what they originally announced is that all recordings by default would be deleted after 60 days. They then said, based on feedback, we've decided to change the auto retention period to be 120 days, sorry, auto expiration period to be 120 days. Then they said about a week later, actually, we've decided not to roll this out for the moment. So they rolled out the ability to have an expiration date. And if I set a date, so if I set a date of say 1st of March for this video, it's not allowing me to set a date, I'm not sure why, then the video will actually delete. So it will send me a notification as the owner of the video it's going to delete, and it will actually delete it. But the date won't automatically be set. And if it's OneDrive, there's no way easily of automatically setting the date. So as of today, meeting recordings will stay there forever. Okay. But if you do want to delete them, you have to go and set the expiration date. Okay, going back to my meeting information. So I've got my transcript, and if I was in the desktop edition of Teams, that would allow me to download the transcript as a, I think, VTX file or a docx file, a Word file. And I've got my attendance report, which downloads. Now, if I go up here, I've got an attendance tab. This will show me the attendance report just directly in the interface. So you can see here who attended, how long they attended for. Okay. You have to enable this if you want it in your tenancy for meetings. And then finally, if I click on polls here, then if there was a poll run, then I can access the poll and I can export the results there. Now, just one last thing. I'm a massive fan of Microsoft Whiteboard, and actually the Teams version of Microsoft Whiteboard has had a significant revamp in the last 3 months. And they've added some really, really nice features, the ability to use templates. So you can select from a whole range of templates to start. They've added a whole load of capabilities that make it easier if you're using a mouse and you don't have a pen. It is a great tool. So that's there. and the one for Windows 10 and 11, the desktop app, if you're using that, has yet to be updated. I think it's in beta at the moment, but hopefully in the next month that's going to be updated. Just an important point about Whiteboard. Come March, your whiteboards will be stored in OneDrive. Currently they're stored somewhere else, but they are moving to be stored in OneDrive. Okay, so that gives a nice little bonus that it allows you to invite external guests to collaborate on a whiteboard with you, which is, I know, something that quite a few people have been asking for. Okay, so that's pretty much it with meetings. I just want to move on and talk a little bit about some of the chat and collaboration features. Okay, so first one, most important to me, you've probably all seen these, but you've got a new range of emojis available to you, and most of these are animated. So if I want to use one that I don't really know what it means, but it's the emo one where he just flicks his hair up. There we go. And more importantly, actually for me, is there is now an official llama one, which I can use. So those should be in your tenancy today. And they are obviously enliven any conversation. Next thing is the ability to reply to a chat. Now, again, this has been out for a while, so I'm sure you've probably seen it, but let's take this conversation here. Whole loads of conversation. Now, if I wanted to respond or reply to something that was said earlier on in the conversation chain, it becomes difficult in a private chat because every new chat is just added to the bottom of the list. So if I wanted to refer back to this conversation here, what reply does is it takes that snippet of conversation, adds it into a new conversation post, and allows me to then respond to it. Okay, so that's replying to a chat. Now, interestingly, that capability is not available within channel chats. At the moment, I'm in a private chat or group chat. If I go into Teams and I go into a channel, there is no concept of a reply here. And the reason for that is channels already have the ability to reply. Now, if you do need to do the same thing that I mentioned before, so you basically want to refer to something that someone said earlier, the only really way to do it is to take the content, and when you reply, use the formatting options, use the quote button, paste it in, and then paste what you want to say. It's not great, but that's how I would do that. Okay, so if we go back into chat, a couple of other things. If someone's asked of you to do something or there's something that you want to follow up on, a few ways you can do this in Teams. So you can effectively now create a task based on a chat or conversation. And so when I create a task, this will give me the option of either creating a Microsoft To-Do task or add a task to an existing planner task list. So it takes across the description, sorry, the whole chat. So I'm going to change that. So I'll just change it to courier for printers. I'm going to say this is important. And here it'll say, where do you want to put the task? So this will know any Microsoft planner plans that I am a member of. So I can add it there. Or if I just leave it in tasks, it'll add it into my own to-do list. I can select a date. I can overwrite the description and click add task. And if I want to go and see that task, I go to my app over here, tasks by planner and to do. And this will give me an aggregated view of all of my to-do tasks and also my planner tasks. And you can see here, Courier for printers has been added into my to-do list. And if you're using to-do on your mobile device or the desktop app, I use it a lot, it's this one here, then obviously it will synchronize with that as well. Now, the only thing is, again, it's a little bit of a clunky feature. So if I click on the task here and I want to get back to the Teams conversation, it does give me a link back to it. It'll then, in this case, say, do you want to open this in a desktop, which I don't. So I'll click on use web instead. And then it'll take me to that point in the conversation. It should take me to that point in the conversation, which it didn't. So yeah, it is a bit clunky. It should highlight the point in the conversation and take me straight back to it. Probably works better when you do it from the desktop, but quite a useful feature. One other thing that I do quite a lot, if you don't want to create a task, I often bookmark conversations. So yeah, sorry, save this message. So I use that much more than if I were to do the way of adding a to-do, because your saved messages are then all stored for you here. And then you can get back to them, and when you've dealt with it, you can just unbookmark it and it's gone. Okay. Okay, so sometimes when I'm in a chat, I want the ability to constantly refer back to a given conversation, something that's, you know, kind of really important that's been said, something that is we're always going to refer back to. So for this, just see which one I wanted to use. Yeah, so let's say someone's posted in a link to some Viva Learning content, and obviously over the course of time, this conversation chat will get very long, but I can take any conversation chat and I can now pin it. And if I pin it, what it'll do is it'll take that and it'll add it to the top of the list. Okay, so it doesn't matter where you are in the list, it'll always appear as a pinned one to the top, and when I click on it, it'll take you directly back to that one in the list. So if I go back to my longer list here and I pin this one, when I scroll down to the bottom, when I click that, it'll always take me back to that one, top of the list. Okay, so a useful thing just to keep a piece of content at the top of the list. Unless it's changed, that isn't yet available for, oh, it is available, right. No, yeah, I was going to say, so in channels, you can pin things, but unfortunately, when you pin them, it puts it on the tab here and puts it at the bottom there, which is, I'm going to say, largely useless because no one ever looks in there. So at some point, hopefully that little pin icon will do the same as you can in the private chats and put it at the top of the list. Okay, so another thing, and again, you might have noticed this, is the way that files and you interact with files within Teams. There are a few things about how that's changed. So an example would be when I click on a file to open it, historically, the default behavior was that file would open within Teams. So it would open keeping Teams, and it would open, in this case, PowerPoint within the Teams interface. Okay, and then I'd have to say open in desktop app, or whatever I want to do with it. Now, effectively, certainly in my day-to-day work, what I want to do is I want to make sure that it always opens in a desktop app, because 9 times out of 10, I'm usually opening a file because I want to edit it. And you've now got the option to change the default. So if I go to here, I can change the default. Because I'm in the browser, it doesn't actually, for some reason, give me the desktop app option, but you should get the option, if you're in a desktop, to open in the desktop. And when you set that, it'll set it for everywhere within Teams. So really useful time saving. The next thing is when you add a document into a conversation, You might have noticed that the share copy link has changed, and also the way that documents are shared within Teams has changed. So let me just explain what's happening. If I add a document into a Teams conversation, and let's say I add it from OneDrive, I'm not going to upload a copy, I'm going to share a link. So in this case, what's happening is the document isn't being copied into this team. A link is being added into the post. And so when the link's added, you might not see that very well. Let me just zoom in. It says, here is the sharing policy associated with this file. Now, you might initially think, why is the sharing policy anyone with the link can edit? Well, that's because this document is a document in my OneDrive, and the organization's default sharing policy for OneDrive content is anyone with the link can edit. Remember, it's not moved the document across to Teams. All it's done is put a sharing link, even though it looks like it's the document. If I click on this, it now brings up the standard, I'm just going to zoom out slightly, standard SharePoint and OneDrive sharing box. Okay, so anyone, and allow editing, set an expiration date, etc., etc. The only difference here is because it knows the document is in a team, I can say this link will only work for people within my team here is called design. If that looks a bit confusing, that's the name of the team. Okay. So when I post this, it's added a link to the document that sits in my OneDrive, but the link will only work for people who are a member of this team. Now, apologies if that seems slightly confusing, but sharing can be a little confusing in SharePoint and Teams, but that's what's happening. And now, whenever you go to a document that's already been posted and you say copy link, the default sharing behavior, just do that again, will default, you can then decide who to share it with. Now remember, I obviously have to have rights to create a sharing link to the document that's sitting on OneDrive, but I just thought I'd show you this because it is a change to how Teams used to deal with sharing of content. It's now far more akin to how sharing works in SharePoint, in OneDrive, and in the Office applications. Okay, so a couple of other general settings that are useful to know within the Teams interface. If you go up to your settings at the top here, and we go into, actually, I'll just say this one. So for some of you, you might be members or guests in other people's tenancies. And sometimes you see people with lists of 10, 20, 30, 50 tenancies listed down here. You can now manage those tenancies. If you go into settings and go into accounts, you can then see your list of tenancies that you're a member of, guest member, and you can leave the organization, hide it, or turn off notifications if you don't want any notifications to come from that tenancy. So certainly if you work across different tenancies, that is really, really useful. The other setting here, and I love it when they call a setting comfy or compact. So there's changed the options you have for chats. They call it chat density. And so the default, the one that you'll be familiar with, is comfy. But if you want to increase the amount of content you get on the page, you can change to compact. So if I just show you that in action, this only works for private chats, by the way, not for channel conversations. This is now set into compact mode. So you can see all of the chat conversations are squeezed together. There's a reduction in the amount of screen real estate. I mean, all the options are still there. So if I want to reply and they're all still there, but it kind of just reduces the amount of screen real estate used. If I switch back, go to comfy, then you get this. Now I've been trying them both out and I'm more of a comfy sort of guy, to be honest, rather than a compact guy. Maybe that says a lot about me, but yeah, so have a play about with it, see whichever one you prefer. I'm sure there's, you know, it's a personal preference thing. If we go back into settings here, then the out of office. So I pretty much exclusively manage my calendar within Teams now, but one of the things that I always would have to do is to go into Outlook to set my out of office. This is now available to do directly within Teams. So if you want to set an out of office reply message, you can set it here. If you want to set it to people outside your organization, set it here. And if you want to specify when the out of office turns on, when it turns off, then you can do it here. Once you apply this, this will apply to both Outlook and to Teams. So you only have to do it in one place. And then finally, just talking about calendars, one of the things that's helped me transition to use my Teams calendar is calendars now support categories. So if within your Outlook, you've defined a series of categories for calendar entries and given them meaning as opposed to red, orange, you know, yellow, then those now appear through to Teams and you can set them with Teams. So that was always the thing that held me back before, because with a lot of things in your calendar, it can sometimes be difficult to see, you know, what a project, what a for me, pre or sales, which ones are mics, i.e. they're less important to me, which ones are more important to me, those type of things. Okay, right. So kind of last main demo I want to finish off with, and I want to spend a little bit of time with this, is Microsoft Loop. And I think Microsoft Loop has the potential in a stealthy way to really change, at first subtly, but change the way we think about collaboration or collaborating on certain activities. So I'm just going to give you a very simple scenario. Let's say Megan here is organizing a webinar, and a lot of things in their first sort of early stages of organization, certainly for me, they start as a chat. So I'm just going to create a new chat and I'm going to give it a little name. So I'm going to say Teams webinar, and I'm going to invite a few people to get their input. So I'm going to invite Alex, invite Miriam, and I'm just going to do the usual thing. Hi, can you help? With planning this event. Okay, obviously I'd put an emoji after that. And obviously they're going to say yes. Now, let's say the first thing we need is a event abstract, little sort of thing. So what would usually happen here is either I'd go away and write a Word document or I'd go and use a OneNote. Now, both of those are great because both of those applications support the ability to collaborate on a piece of content. But you know what? It's a bit fiddly. I've got to click Add Tab. I've got to click, you know, add a Word document. I've got to create the document, or I've got to create a OneNote thing. I kind of want it to be more immediate. So I'm just going to paste my initial idea for my webinar abstract into the chat. So I'm going to paste it in here. Well, top tip, if you want to paste stuff into a chat and remove formatting, oops, he says, just do Shift Control V and it'll pull all of the formatting out of what you're going to paste. So I'm going to paste that in. Now that's great, but when Alex comes along, let's just go into, this is me logged in as Alex. I go into my chat. Now Alex wants to make a suggestion, but it's kind of cumbersome for Alex to say, I would change the sentence, you know, sentence 1 or whatever the title, blah, blah, blah. It's a bit cumbersome, right? So this is where Loop comes in. I'm going to add a Loop component to this chat, and the component I'm going to add is called a paragraph. So Nothing particularly exciting so far. I'm going to paste in the same text, but what I'm going to do is take the title out and put it as the title there. And I'm going to click send. So on face value, you'd say, you've just done the same thing. What's the difference? Here's the difference. Alex can now take that component and can directly edit it. And if I go back to Megan, I can see that Alex is editing it, and I can see where Alex is in that document. So I'm going to change the name of that. And if I go back to Alex, then you can see Alex can see where Megan is. Now that's pretty cool, because instead of me having to create a separate Word document or a OneNote, or us constantly toing and froing with the chat, we now have a piece of content that we can all collaborate on, okay? And it'll stay in place, and we can work on it over a period of time until we're happy with it. And what I might do is pin it to the top. So whilst we're all working on it, it's very easy and quick to get back to. Now, let's think about the next stage. So we're working on this abstract, but there's some other things that we need to do with the webinar. We might need to plan a date. We might need to invite some people. So for that, Megan's going to say, so what other actions we need to do? And Alex is thinking, well, this sounds like a perfect job for loop again, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a loop component, and I'm going to add a task list. Now, I know what you might be thinking. Well, I could go and create a Microsoft list, or I could go and create an Excel workbook. The point here is I'm doing it all within the context of the conversation. So I'm going to say webinar to-do list, and I'm going to say complete abstract, assign it to that to Megan, and then set a date, and I'm going to say schedule event. I'll do that myself. And then finally, invite attendees, very important. And I'll give that to Miriam. Okay. Now, same principle for the task list as the paragraph. Obviously, the paragraph is there to support collaborating on a piece of content. The task list, oh, I didn't save that, is about, see whether, oh, yes, I did, is about adding a series of tasks. And it pretty much works like a real task list. I can say, yep, I've done that. Yes, I've done that. Add task, reassign task, and that's permanently there to use. Now, as I said, you know, us techies would say, well, why don't I create a Microsoft list to do that? You can do all of that. But the point is the user here can do it in the context of the conversation that they're having. Now, I don't want to go too far into kind of where Loop's going. I just wanted to show you a practical example of actually something that Mike and I use it for quite a lot. But I think it's very powerful. And the great thing is this content isn't exclusive to Teams. I can take this content, I could send it via email, and actually where Loop is going in the future is these little Loop components can appear in emails. So Alex could be sent an email with this task list, and in the email, as he's typing and adjusting it, it's updating the same content that I might be viewing in Teams, or someone else might be viewing on a SharePoint page. So some pretty exciting stuff. So I'm going to kind of stop there because I'm conscious that we might have a few questions, and I will hand back to Mike.
Thank you, James. So let me just get up the page. There we go. So some great tips there, James. Thank you very much. I particularly like the polls and quizzes feature. I can feel another Friday pub quiz coming on. Uh, and the loop component, you're absolutely right. That's something that me and you use, and we even use to plan this webinar. So we are going to open it up. We've got about 8 or 9 minutes or so for any questions. So please feel free to post these in the chat, or raise your hand, or even drop me a message directly, and I will read them out.
So Mark, a question, where is loop saved? So each individual loop component is saved as a .loop file. And at the moment, they're all saved in the OneDrive of the person who created the loop component. So if you were to look into your OneDrive, and I will just share my screen. Go into my OneDrive. Oh, I'm sorry, it was Alex who created the component. So you can see here, these are all the components. If I then go to open file location, they're all stored under Microsoft Team chat files. And you can see, sorry, it's a .fluid component, as they used to be called, fluid components. The great thing about them being stored in OneDrive is they're already subject to the same policies and governance that applies to any other content that exists in OneDrive, including obviously their deletion when someone leaves.
Got a question from Francis direct here. Do I need any additional licenses for Microsoft Loop?
No. So it's included within your standard, whatever Microsoft 365 licensing you already have.
Perfect. And type in another question. Bear with. So I don't have some of the features being shown. Is that because they're still being rolled out?
Yeah, so one thing to be aware of with Teams is things get rolled out in different stages. You can see up here, although it's very small, that I have a little P above the account, and that's because this is running the public preview. So it's possible, certainly possibly with Loop, that unless you've got public preview enabled, you won't at the moment see the Loop component down here. But different tenancies, different environments have different rates that they receive things. But certainly, if you want to see the latest stuff, then you need to be enable preview. Now, if you go to About and you can't see preview there, it's because in your organization, they've prevented you from enabling the preview mode.
Thank you, James. Andy's asking, can you talk about the new shared channel feature?
Yeah, so I wanted to be able to show that today, but unfortunately, it's not rolled out. So I didn't want to spend a lot of time kind of asking you to imagine something. But essentially, this is a really important change to the way we think about structuring and managing individual teams. So currently, in a given team, you have a concept of channels, as I'm sure you're all aware. And when you create a channel, you can create a channel as either a standard channel or a private channel. Now, the difference is that with the standard channel, everyone that you've invited to the team has access to that channel and the content within it. Whereas with a private channel, everyone who you invite to the team doesn't necessarily have access to the private channel. It is a subset of people within the team that have access to the private channel. Now, shared channels are unique in the fact that they will allow you to invite people into a shared channel without inviting that person to the wider team with which that channel sits within. So imagine a scenario that I've got a procurement process and I've got 10 procurement exercises going on, and I've got a team for the procurement process, and I want to have a channel for each procurement exercise, and I want to invite external vendors into only the channel that they've been invited to. That's very difficult to do at the moment. What people have to do is create separate teams. But what shared channels will allow you to do is to restrict the access to an individual shared channel and not give that person any access to the wider team. Now, there's one other thing that's really important, and that's that if you invite guests to a shared channel, they will be able to see and interact with that guest channel within their home tenancy. So if I were to go to, say, Megan here, at the moment, if Megan wants to see anything in the Silver Sands tenancy, Megan has to switch tenancies. And not only does that take time, it also means that Megan's not immediately catching up with chats and things going on. But with the shared channel, Megan wouldn't have to do that. Megan will be looking at the Contoso tenancy, and in here, Megan would see the name of the team and the channel that has been shared to Megan from the Silver Sands tenancy. And that's a really important difference for the way guest access is going to work and be managed.
Fantastic. Thank you, James. Colin's just messaged me the exact same question I was thinking, actually. Is it possible to collaborate with guests on whiteboards yet? So I know you were showing that it all looks really cool, but can you actually work with guests on a single whiteboard?
So the ability to collaborate with guests on a whiteboard is intrinsically tied to changing the location of your whiteboard storage to OneDrive. Okay. So as of today, you can elect to opt into your OneDrive storage being where whiteboards are being stored. However, there are some issues with that, and I wouldn't suggest you do it unless you really need to. As far as I know, Microsoft have committed to make sure that organizations can transition to OneDrive for whiteboard storage in Q1 this year, this quarter, which effectively means by the end of March. That is the enabler that allows the guest sharing of whiteboards, because being in OneDrive, it allows it to make use of the capabilities in OneDrive to support guest sharing. So not today, but in the imminent future. Now, I'm just saying that's what I understand it to be, but Microsoft often pull the rug out from me when I say things in a month's time, but that's definitely what's in their roadmap.
Brilliant. That'd be really useful, I think, being able to collaborate on joint whiteboards. So yeah, thank you, James. So are there any other questions from anyone else? I can't see anyone typing, so if not, I'll just share the final slide, which is this one. So just to say thank you, James. Really enjoyed that session. Lots I've learned there. Lots of stuff I'll start to incorporate into my day-to-day life. For those that have also enjoyed the session and would like to run either similar sessions in your own organisation, we do offer a quick starter package on Microsoft Teams. So it's £1,000. You get 4 sessions, and they're designed to be very interactive. It's to support key processes in Teams such as chat, meetings, collaboration, and co-authoring as well. And we can tailor them to be technical, non-technical, for the execs, and different tiers as well. They're really designed to get you up to speed and show you the art of the possible. You know, what can you do with Teams? So what we'll do is we'll send out a copy of that package alongside the recording today. And I'm just going to post into the chat the final reminder for the survey and the events list, which has just gone in there. But again, thank you all for attending. Thank you, James, and we hope you all have a lovely weekend as well. Cheers.
Thank you, everyone.